Chapter 31. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Back to Akasha, with a wave of her hand, a bunch of virtual windows displaying potential candidates popped up, who would be her next pick. Gilgamesh and Solomon had stumbled upon the truth by chance. Well, Solomon had been deliberately led there. Now, for the third candidate, it looked like Brunhilde would have to dig through 7 million years of human history herself. Since the first two were both kings, she decided to narrow the field and filter for other famous kings. Under Brunhilde's control, the virtual windows reorganized, now displaying images of history's most renowned monarchs. With another wave, an image moved to the forefront. Qin Shi Huang, the first king to call himself emperor, in 221 BC, after conquering the 6 warring states, Qin Shi Huang felt the existing titles didn't properly convey his achievements. He considered the titles held by previous rulers, Jun or king, insufficient. He ordered his ministers to come up with something grander. They suggested his achievements, leading righteous armies, punishing remaining rebels, and pacifying the world, were unprecedented, surpassing even the 5 emperors. They cited ancient, revered titles, noting, in ancient times, there were emperors of heaven, earth, and the supreme emperor, with the supreme emperor being the most noble. They proposed he adopt the title of supreme emperor. But Qin Shi Huang wasn't satisfied. Believing he possessed the virtues of the 3 emperors and exceeded the merits of the 5, he combined Huang from the 3 emperors and Di from the 5 emperors to create the title Huangdi, or emperor. He became the first ruler in the Eastern world to use the term, styling himself first emperor. The Eastern world was witnessing conflicts on a scale far beyond that of other regions. In the West, a battlefield involving tens of thousands of soldiers was considered a massive engagement. In the East, battles involved hundreds of thousands of troops, a completely different level of warfare. The East wasn't just numerically superior, its military strategies and weaponry were also more advanced. If the world were connected and easily traversed, Brunhilde wondered if the first emperor could have conquered the whole thing. Perhaps, if he'd possessed a complete map and realized the world's true size, he wouldn't have confined himself to his current territory but would have expanded his empire even further. Someone like that deserved a spot on Brunhilde's list. It was a shame, because such a figure could have led his country to unprecedented power and lasting glory. But in his later years, the first emperor, fearing death, sought immortality. He turned into a tyrant, suppressing dissent and undermining the Qin dynasty's foundations. After his death, the nobles from the conquered states, who had been suppressed and silenced during his reign, rose up in rebellion, plunging the Qin dynasty into chaos. The first emperor's sudden death also allowed Zhao Gao and Li Si to forge an edict, naming Hu Hai as his successor. They falsely accused Fusu of filial impiety and Meng Tian of disloyalty, forcing them to commit suicide. Hu Hai's reign saw the rise of Zhao Gao, who wielded immense power, controlled the government, and persecuted loyalists, hastening the dynasty's collapse. Finally, in 207 BC, the Qin dynasty fell. Such an unprecedented empire lasted only a little over a decade, a brilliant but fleeting firework. Brunhilde had heard rumors about why the Qin dynasty ended that way. It was said that the first emperor's pursuit of immortality, his attempt to become a god, angered the gods. His arrogance and hubris invited their intervention, causing the empire to crumble. Divine punishment, plain and simple. Though short-lived, the dynasty left a lasting mark on human history. Its founder, the first emperor, was a controversial figure, often labeled a tyrant. History painted him as cruel and ruthless, citing the burning of books, persecution of scholars, and construction of extravagant projects like the Apang Palace, the Great Wall, and his own tomb. His relentless exploitation of the people doomed the dynasty. But was that the whole story? If not, what was the truth? The only way to know was to enter the historical records in Akasha. Hey, Sister Brunhilde, I think I'll stay here this time. Okay. Brunhilde understood. Gray was scared. 2 difficult experiences in a row had unnerved her. She was also afraid of accidentally causing more trouble, of finding herself in yet another impossible situation. Oh. Randy Grace, want to come along? Brunhilde had planned to go alone, but she noticed her younger sister looking at her hopefully. Well, can I? Randy Grace had been about to say she'd stay and keep an eye on things, but under her sister's intense gaze, she simply caved. Her sister preferred directness and hated wishy-washy behavior. "Sure, having you alone will make me feel better. You're not as useless as Gray." Ouch! Gray clutched her chest at her sister's words. Brunhilde never hesitated to throw a little shade at her. "Let's go." Brunhilde set the time to 221 BC, when the first emperor assumed his title, and the location to Xianyang. Then, she logged in. The world around the two sisters blurred. In an instant, they were engulfed in a swirling vortex of rainbow light. When the light faded, the distortion cleared, and they were no longer in Akasha. As their vision sharpened, they stared in disbelief. They weren't in Xianyang. They were on a battlefield. A transmission error. Chapter 32. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What grabbed Brunhild and Randy Grace's attention was a gruesome battlefield swarming with fighting humans. The sight made Randy Grace gasp. Corpses littered the red-stained ground. "Sis, weren't we headed to Xianyang City? Where are we?" "That is where I set the destination." Brunhilde frowned. She was certain her coordinates were correct. How could they end up here? A glitch in the Akasha system? Unthinkable. Examining the fight more closely, their clothing and weapons suggested these armies were from the Qin dynasty. Actually, no. This is the Warring States period, before Qin Shi Huang unified China, but which battle of the Warring States could this be? Wait a minute. What is it, sis? The flags are wrong. No such flag existed during the Warring States period. That the army with the most soldiers carried a banner unlike any Brunhilde had studied from the Sengoku era. Chinese, Brunhilde murmured. She recognized the army with the massive numbers. They weren't in the Warring States period, but the Qin dynasty. No, that wasn't right either. The Qin dynasty had fallen. They were witnessing the Chuhan contention, a battle between those two forces. The clash of metal, the thunder of hooves, and the roars of men filled the air. One side clearly had superior numbers, yet their equipment seemed equal to their enemy. Even so, they were being pushed back. The larger army belonged to the king of Han, while the smaller force fought for the overlord. The overlord's soldiers fought with terrifying ferocity, fearlessly shedding blood and horrifying the Han army. If their weapons were knocked away, they used their fists. If their hands were severed, they kicked with their feet, bit with their teeth, and headbutt their opponents. As long as they lived, they would kill with all their might. This brutal defiance was keeping the king of Han's army at bay. For every one of the overlord's soldiers killed, the king of Han paid with at least 10 of his own. However, the disparity in numbers was simply too great. No matter how brave and skilled the overlord's soldiers, they couldn't withstand the tide. From what she could see, no more than 1,000 of the overlord's men remained, facing a force of 50,000 from the king of Han. An overwhelming disadvantage. These soldiers were nearing their limit. It was only a matter of time before they were wiped out. So, had this unit become separated from the main force? Were they being encircled and destroyed by the king of Han's army? More likely, this was the end of the Chu-Han contention, the final moments of Xiangyu, the overlord of Western Chu. But where was this legendary overlord? Following the lines of sight toward the shrinking circle of cavalry, Brunhilde sensed an intense aura of deadly force. Suddenly, the Han soldiers, who had been closing the circle, opened a path, and a figure of immense presence emerged. From afar, he looked like a large, bearded man. But a closer look revealed striking handsomeness. It was Xiangyu, the overlord of Western Chu, clad in battle armor. He gripped his overlord halberd. With his eyes closed, he took a few steps forward, causing the surrounding Han soldiers to recoil in fear for hundreds of feet. Sweat poured, and dread filled their faces. Advance. What are you scared of? There are only a few of them left. Whoever kills Xiangyu will be made a marquis. That the promise of nobility instantly ignited the fearful Han soldiers' eyes. Greed overwhelmed them. They salivated at the thought of claiming the ultimate prize. As the saying goes, a great reward brings out brave men. The temptation of becoming a marquis, even a prime minister, was too strong to resist. Kill! Kill! That they raised their blood-stained blades and charged. The overlord soldiers didn't even try to stop them. They stood firm. Were they abandoning their king? No. They were following orders, unspoken yet clear. Brunhilde knew that the overlord hadn't given any explicit commands. This was a silent understanding. A king's will communicated through a look. Though exhausted, the overlord's soldiers' eyes were sharp and resolute. They believed their king was invincible, that he would lead them to escape the encirclement. The charging soldiers were almost upon him, raising their weapons to strike. At that moment, the overlord's eyes snapped open, revealing double pupils. A surge of savage power stunned the advancing soldiers, freezing them in their tracks. Simultaneously, the overlord held his halberd horizontally, twisting his body backward. The tip of the weapon extended behind him, then, like a drawn bowstring released, a terrifying force ripped through the air with a crack. The halberd swung forward, cutting down all soldiers within its reach. Those who weren't struck directly were still torn apart by the force. Even further away, soldiers suffered gaping abdominal wounds. Screams of agony echoed across the battlefield. Brunhilde was stunned. This wasn't some supernatural phenomenon, but simply air compressed at high speed by the force of the swing. The resulting pressure was like an invisible blade. Logically, such a swing should have created a violent gust of wind. Instead, the air was eerily still. The overlord had focused all the energy from the swing at the tip of his halberd, unleashing an ultra-thin air cut. Monster. I don't want to be a marquis or a prime minister. I just want to live. We can't win. That the bloody swing terrified the Han army. They broke ranks and fled. Faced with chaos, the Han general had to temporarily call off the attack to regroup his forces. The overlord's army charged after them. At that moment, a sharp whistle pierced the air. The overlord had thrown his halberd. It pierced dozens of men before striking the Han general, knocking him off his horse. Brunhilde's eyes shone. Wasn't the person before her exactly what she needed? Chapter 33. You are listening at novelfull.audio. For a warrior as fierce as Brunhilde, she'd always had a plan. It centered on Lu Bu, a legendary general from the late Eastern Han dynasty, a hero of his age. She considered him the mightiest figure in that land's history, from the Warring States period to modern times. Even before the gods' meeting, Brunhilde had pre-selected several champions, and Lu Bu was high on that list. He's world famous, inspiring countless novels, games, and animations. Across these portrayals, he's consistently depicted as a powerhouse. Naturally, Brunhilde had to verify his reputation. After researching his history, she was stunned. He lived up to the hype. Barring any surprises, she figured he was a shoo-in for one of her 13 slots. She envisioned him as humanity's vanguard, hoping he'd secure the first victory and shut the gods up. But seeing Xiangyu, the overlord of Western Chu, Brunhilde realized her mistake. She'd let preconceived notions cloud her judgment, assuming that because Lu Bu was more globally recognized, he was the strongest hero from that region. Right now, Xiangyu, the key figure in toppling the Qin dynasty, radiated an even more intense aura than Lu Bu. Just judging by raw power, he seemed every bit Lu Bu's equal, and in terms of overall stature, Lu Bu couldn't compete. Xiangyu was known as the overlord, the leader of the princes. Lu Bu's highest position, in comparison, was limited to being the overlord of Shuzhou, which was nowhere near the same league. Militarily, Xiangyu was on another level. Lu Bu never fought any truly significant battles. Maybe that's because Lu Bu was just after raw strength, but as a war leader, Lu Bu fell short. Xiangyu, on the other hand, masterminded the Battle of Jiulu. Leading tens of thousands of Chu troops, he confronted Qin's 400,000 soldiers in a desperate fight. Fearlessly leading the charge while other princes hesitated, he routed the Qin army. Then, he committed an unspeakable act, massacring over 200,000 Qin soldiers in a single night. Then there was the Battle of Pengcheng during the Chu-Han contention. With Xiangyu's bold command, 30,000 Chu soldiers crushed over 500,000 Han troops in half a day, wiping out Liu Bang's main force. Besides these two legendary battles, he won far more than he lost in countless other skirmishes. Politically, both men were lacking. It was his poor political skills and his penchant for cruelty, massacring cities and subjugated soldiers, that led to his isolation and ultimate downfall. This once great overlord met his end at the Wujiang River, taking his own life. Because he was too ashamed to face his elders back in Jiangdong. The current battle unfolding before the two Valkyrie sisters was the Battle of Gaixia. this marked the end of Xiang Yu's glorious life. Even in his final, desperate moments, the Overlord remained the Overlord. With fewer than 1,000 cavalrymen, he charged into an army of tens of thousands, scattering them and leaving behind a scene of devastation. Looking at the battlefield littered with corpses, almost all of them Han soldiers, Brunhilde estimated nearly 10,000 casualties. The Overlord's side had lost barely 100 riders, that was an average of 1 against 100, an unbelievable feat. Now, having witnessed the historical record in action, Brunhilde had no doubts about the accounts of Julu and Pengcheng. This is Overlord Xiang Yu. That the confused voice wasn't Brynhild's but that of her sister, Rangriz, who was standing beside her. Her face showed a mixture of shock and awe at the Overlord's dominance. After scattering the Han army, Xiang Yu and his remaining 800 or so cavalrymen didn't flee. They moved deliberately. The quickly reorganized Han army sent 5,000 elite cavalry after them. Swords clashed again, and bodies fell into pools of blood. After losing nearly half of their elite cavalry, the Han troops retreated, letting the tens of thousands of infantry who had arrived form an encirclement. But just like before, the Han army recoiled. This time, it seemed like they were deliberately retreating before being completely routed. Brunhilde saw that the commander was using a war of attrition. They didn't want a decisive battle, knowing that the more brutally Xiang Yu fought, the more demoralized the Han army would become. Instead, they attacked in waves, giving Xiang Yu and his men no chance to rest, hoping to wear them down and finally overwhelm them. In this way, they slowly pushed him towards the riverbank, the site of the Overlord's historical demise. Reaching the river, the Overlord suddenly stopped. He planted his weapon, a halberd, firmly in the ground, its rear end pulsing with light. The constant flashing light looked like a signal beacon. What was going on? Brunhilde was puzzled. Suddenly, the air around the halberd began to distort. No, it was space itself that was warping, twisting the halberd into fragments. Then, a sudden flash of white light erupted. Sister, Rangriz couldn't help but gasp, her eyes wide with disbelief at the spectacle. After the flash, a bizarre doorway appeared out of thin air. How to describe it? It resembled a portal from a sci-fi movie, an oval curtain of white light hanging in the middle of nowhere. The strange sight stirred Xiang Yu's men. They exchanged astonished glances, though some seemed strangely calm, as if they'd seen something like this before. Then, a shadow appeared in the light curtain, gradually solidifying as if someone was about to emerge, and then, someone did. A team of dozens of people. The team's appearance made most of Xiang Yu's men reach for their weapons, ready to fight, but it was this team that shocked Brunhilde. Black armor. Could it be the Qin dynasty army? Chapter 34. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Something's off about the armor this Black Ops team is wearing. It doesn't look like anything that could be made with the technology of this period. Armor back then was usually made of copper or iron sheets connected in rows, just a chest plate with shoulder pads, at best, but these guys are almost completely encased in sleek, polished black armor. It's not just segmented plates, it's like one solid piece, molded to fit their bodies. This is. Brunhilde recognized the material and was visibly shaken. There's no way the smelting techniques of this era could produce armor like that. You'd need technology from thousands of years in the future. Even then, it wouldn't be standard issue for regular soldiers. Only generals would get something like that, but this whole squad is decked out like this. Clearly, it's been mass-produced. She figured they were from the Qin dynasty because she saw the Qin symbol on their armor and their battle flag. Of course, the weirdest thing was this portal. It looked like something out of fantasy, like Eastern magic, but with a technological edge. Totally bizarre. So, what was on the other side? Some unknown place. Another dimension, like King Solomon's secret space. No way to know without going through it, which brought her back to the original question. Was this really the Qin army? If so, why were they saluting Xiang Yu? Seemed like he was in charge, their direct superior, and what was in that huge crate they were hauling? Then, Xiang Yu walked up to the crate and slammed his hand down on it. The wooden box exploded with a loud crack, revealing what was inside. A person, wrapped in a black robe. Was this person locked in there? Dead? Brunhilde couldn't sense any life. Then, red lights flickered under the hood, like glowing eyes. A faint whirring sound, like gears turning, followed, and then several cable-like tubes shot out of the figure's body, jabbing into Xiang Yu. Whoa! Randy Grace gasped, covering her mouth. Brunhilde's pupils narrowed. It was all so strange, those cables, were they draining Xiang Yu's brain? And these cables were emerging from what sounded like a mechanically powered body. It started to glow, not an overall light, but like when a robot powers up, with lights in specific spots. Xiang Yu's men rushed to his aid, but the armored soldiers blocked them. The cables detached from Xiang Yu's body, apparently having absorbed something. Brunhilde was now certain. Xiang Yu was dead. He was still standing, eyes open, but they were lifeless, and his heart was no longer beating. She couldn't wrap her head around it. Why would Xiang Yu let that thing kill him? He could have fought back, Brunhilde was sure of it. But he just stood there and let it happen. Was he resigned to his fate, knowing he was powerless? No, she hadn't seen a trace of despair, frustration, or even annoyance in his eyes. This warlord seemed to have everything under control. It made no sense. It was a hopeless situation, so why the confident look? History was being rewritten. Stop, stop, not a normal human voice, but coming from the figure, a halting, stuttering sound, as if it was speaking for the first time. The figure finally started to move, mechanically, like a robot booting up. It reached up, grabbed the black robe, and ripped it off, revealing what was hidden beneath. Everyone, except the black armored soldiers, was stunned. What's going on, sis? Randy Grace looked at the figure in disbelief, her face pale. I have no idea, Brunhilde whispered, equally stunned. The figure under the robe was Xiang Yu, the warlord of Western Chu. What was happening? Were they twins? No way. But something was wrong. Brunhilde couldn't feel a heartbeat in his body. It was like a cold machine. Wait, a machine. She heard the whirring, the gears turning inside him. No freakin' way. Brunhilde couldn't help but tremble, a wild thought racing through her mind. Ha ha ha. She originally thought the third wild card would be a normal human, but she got this, another figure hiding an unbelievable secret. So what was this crazy idea? That the living Xiang Yu was, in today's terms, a mechanical puppet, a robot, or, in modern terms, an android. He'd just uploaded his consciousness, his soul, directly into this body. That had to be it. A mind-bending truth, something out of science fiction was happening right here, right now. Chapter 35. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Xiang Yu ditched his human body, transferring his soul into a mechanical one. Why would he do that? Was his original body failing him, riddled with disease? Doesn't seem like it. More likely he wanted greater power and a longer life. It's like those future humans, trying to cheat death by uploading their consciousness, their soul, into machines to achieve immortality. Studying the mechanical body, Brunhilde realized it wasn't purely science or magic. It was a fusion of both. So, who built this thing for Xiang Yu? How did they learn the technology? Did they get help from some ancient Chinese immortals? Sister, look over there. Randy Grace pointed toward the river. Something wasn't right. The water, further down, was churning, the turbulence spreading toward them. Something big was heading their way, under the surface. What is that? Normal people wouldn't be able to make anything out at that distance, but Brunhilde saw it and was stunned. Something huge was surging through the water, what the West would call a monster, the East would call a demon. It was like a colossal water snake, whipping up the river into a tidal wave. If they didn't move, that wave would sweep hundreds into the river. Was it after these people? Planning on making a meal of them? Judging by his anxious expression, she couldn't wait any longer. Her gaze shifted to Xiang Yu. He'd noticed the malice approaching, too. He raised his halberd above his head, twisting his body slightly. He was getting ready to throw it. Then, the air cracked as a cloud of white mist exploded around Xiang Yu. That mist was from the air compressing as he threw the halberd with incredible force. The halberd was already gone. It tore through the air with a deafening screech. The speed and friction turned the halberd red-hot. Leaving an orange-red trail in its wake, it crossed the river so fast, the resulting pressure sliced through the surface, parting the water. Those cracks in the river sped toward the approaching serpent. Before the giant snake could react, the halberd slammed into it, obliterating it into a cloud of blood and gore. That was the power of Xiang Yu in a mechanical body. That one attack put him on par with a decent demigod, but taking on demigods wouldn't be enough to beat the gods themselves. Brunhild suspected that wasn't all Xiang Yu was capable of. He was new to the body, still getting used to it. That move was just a test run. Brunhild's eyes narrowed as she saw more than just the water snake. More monsters were coming, swarming to devour the serpent's remains, then turning their ravenous attention towards Xiang Yu. The scene left Brunhild bewildered. Their eyes were crazed, like Xiang Yu was carrying some kind of magic elixir they desperately needed. A magic elixir. More likely there was something special about Xiang Yu's body, something that was drawing them in. Immediately, Xiang Yu ordered everyone through the portal, staying behind on the riverbank to face the monsters alone. As dozens of monsters closed in, Brunhild realized she'd been wrong. They weren't after Xiang Yu. They were after the portal. Was the portal some kind of treasure? No, whatever was on the other side was driving them mad. Facing the horde, Xiang Yu clenched his fist and punched forward with tremendous force. The air vibrated. No, space vibrated. The monsters slammed into an invisible wall of air, screaming in agony. But it wasn't just hitting air. Xiang Yu's blow had destabilized space, causing it to ripple and distort. The charging monsters were crashing into the vibrating fabric of reality itself. Weaker monsters were instantly annihilated. Brunhild's eyes widened, her body trembling. To reach this level with brute strength alone, that was beyond the power of most demigods. She'd seen a similar ability before, the ability to strike and distort space, on one other figure, the Greek hero, Hercules. Brunhild knew then that these monsters stood no chance, and yet, despite Xiang Yu's overwhelming power, they kept charging toward the portal, completely berserk. What kind of magic was pulling them in, driving them to such madness? So, what exactly is on the edge? That the last monster, a horned serpent, and the strongest, spoke as it died, briefly regaining its senses. Brunhild listened intently. Would Xiang Yu answer? The Qin Empire. Xiang Yu's answer stunned her. She didn't know if the monster heard him before its eyes closed and its life faded away. Xiang Yu stomped the ground, and the earth shook violently. It felt like the mountains themselves were trembling. The corpses of the monsters were swallowed by the earth, buried deep beneath the ground. With that done, Xiang Yu turned towards the portal, towards his discarded body, standing motionless beside it. Then, Xiang Yu's gaze snapped towards her. His gaze seemed to cut through time and space, the pressure making her break out in a cold sweat. Then, a thoughtful expression crossed his face. Had he spotted her? Chapter 36. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Those eyes, they almost look human. But if you really look, they're more like electronic, and those electronic eyes had double pupils. Those double pupils were fixed on Brunhilde, glowing faintly. Then, he gave her a thoughtful look that tightened her stomach. Had he seen through her? He turned towards the portal and walked in, vanishing. Just as the light curtain flickered, Brunhilde rushed forward and stepped into the portal after him. Wait, what? Brunhilde was stunned. The portal was like a mirage, an illusion, as if she was just passing through thin air. She couldn't actually disappear into the light and be transported somewhere else. She should be able to enter, needed to be able to enter. After all, this was Akasha's record. She should be able to follow. Was she too late? Had the connection already broken? She rewound time, went back, and entered the light while Xiang Yu was still cutting down monsters. Same result. What was going on? She went further back, entering with Xiang Yu's soldiers, but they vanished and she still passed straight through the scene like it was a mirage. What the heck? This shouldn't be happening. Normally, she'd expect to be a mere observer, like encountering a mirage, unable to interfere and passing right through, but she'd specifically told Akasha's record she wanted to go through the portal and see what was on the other side. So why wasn't she being transported? Huh? The ground trembled slightly, like 1,000 horses charging this way, and sure enough, thousands were charging. Liu Bang, the king of Han's army, an endless army approached quickly, stopping 100 yards from Xiang Yu's abandoned body, surrounding him. Xiang Yu. Looks like your luck finally ran out. One of Liu Bang's generals shouted, his voice laced with fear. As he yelled, the Han army echoed the challenge, preparing to attack Xiang Yu with overwhelming force. But Xiang Yu only stood in silence, a helpless expression on his face. They looked at him with fear. The Han troops just saw this as Xiang Yu's silent defiance. They didn't know that the Xiang Yu before them was just an empty shell. His discarded body still stood there, still exuding power that kept the Han army at bay. They all looked fierce but hesitated to advance, each dreamed of claiming Xiang Yu's head and becoming a prince or prime minister, but none dared risk being the first in line. Those who charged ahead would face the overlord's attack head-on, a guaranteed death sentence, let alone a promotion, so everyone had an eye out for a chance to steal the kill, but nobody wanted to sacrifice themselves. The result was a standoff. Each soldier looked to the others, waiting for someone else to make the first move so they could follow from behind. Charge, that the general commanded, but the front lines remained frozen, mostly the soldiers at the front that were too afraid to move. Those behind, further from Xiang Yu's gaze and feeling less pressure, started to shuffle forward. This pushed the front ranks forward against their will, causing a commotion as soldiers clashed. The commander, embarrassed, issued a new order. Stop! Archers, ready. He had no other choice. Infantry parted ranks to reveal archers, who knocked arrows, drew their bows, and took aim. Thousands of arrows prepared to fly. Fire! With a chorus of bowstring snapping, a dense cloud of arrows rained down, aimed to turn Xiang Yu into a pincushion, but the moment the arrows were about to strike, a surge of energy erupted from Xiang Yu's body. This powerful force formed an invisible, flexible shield, deflecting the incoming arrows. Panic spread through the ranks, followed by screams. Faced with this unexpected counterattack, the Han army fell into disarray. Some turned to flee but paused, staring at the demon-like figure. What is that? They stopped in their tracks, bewildered. The overlord of Western Chu, who a moment ago had defied death, now crumbled, his body disintegrating into dust. The soldiers and generals were dumbfounded. As a bystander, Brunhilde could figure out what had happened. Xiang Yu probably set up some sort of trap on his body, and before it disintegrated, he used it to scare them one last time. Brunhilde hit stop, and the world froze. The vibrant colors drained away, leaving only black and white. With a gesture, the Akasha system interface appeared before her. This time, she'd summoned the famous generals who served under Xiang Yu first. She could learn about the overlord's character indirectly from them. Something felt off, and she didn't want to summon him directly just yet. She chose her first target, Fan Zheng, a renowned strategist and statesman from the late Qin dynasty, and Xiang Yu's chief advisor. He was someone who knew Xiang Yu well. History said that Xiang Yu's later distrust of Fan Zheng allowed his enemies to exploit the situation. Fan Zheng resigned in despair and returned home. If Xiang Yu had listened to Fan Zheng's advice, he could have brought peace to the world and become the true ruler of a new empire. Fan Zheng was clearly an extraordinary talent, but was it true that Xiang Yu suspected Fan Zheng and failed to value him? Now that she'd entered Akasha's records and seen how history could be wrong, she couldn't be sure, so, confirmed the summons. But, nothing happened. What's going on? Looking at the explanation on the screen, Brunhilde's face paled slightly. This character's soul cannot be detected. That's why he couldn't be summoned. Usually, this meant one thing: the character's soul had been shattered. No resurrection method could work. They had become dust in the universe, so that's what happened. Fan Zheng had been completely erased. Chapter 37. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Did Fan Zheng know something that needed to be erased completely, like turning his soul into cosmic dust? Why not just kill him to keep his secrets? Obliterating a soul so completely, even if it were resurrected, suggests the target was God. They must have feared God summoning Fan Zheng and learning those secrets, but couldn't they just watch Fan Zheng's life through historical images to uncover those secrets? Not necessarily. There's a portal now, but we can't enter it. We can't know what's being said on the other side. Since Fan Zheng is off limits, maybe we can get some intel from someone else, like Long Xia. Brunhild saw him just now. He followed Xiang Yu through the portal. Summoning him shouldn't be a problem, except this character's soul cannot be detected. What the heck? Was he also wiped out after entering the portal? Fine, let's try someone else. This character's soul cannot be detected. 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 Were they all silenced? After 5 failed attempts, Brunhild's heart sank. she then ran a mass search on the hundreds of others who'd entered the portal, using facial recognition to initiate a batch summons. The result: this character's soul cannot be detected. This character's soul cannot be detected. The screen filled with pop-up windows, each delivering the same message, and she broke out in a cold sweat. Were the souls of hundreds of soldiers just wiped out? Was Xiang Yu, the overlord of Western Chu, really that ruthless? If he was, then some of the historical accounts might be inaccurate. Those accounts often described Xiang Yu's troops committing atrocities when they captured a city, massacring the population. Brunhild refocused and summoned a group of soldiers clad in black armor. Recognition. Summon again. The soul of this character cannot be detected. Same result. Had those black soldiers been dealt with too? Sis, what if they're blocked after entering that portal? Randy Grace suggested quietly. Blocked? How? This is a call from the Akasha system. Anything that exists in this world and universe can be summoned, no matter how hidden. If there's no response, it means the soul has been completely shattered, beyond resurrection, making it undetectable. Brynhildra's voice was loud and borderline frantic. She seemed to find her sister's stupid assumption ridiculous, but in truth, she shared Randy Grace's thought, but refused to believe it. She couldn't believe it, it was impossible. This was the Akasha, recording everything in the universe. Everything that exists is recorded in the Akasha records, and these people have historical records of their actions, right? So, they exist. If they exist, then their souls can be summoned through the Akasha record as long as they haven't been completely shattered. The inability to summon them meant their souls had become cosmic dust. Could their souls have somehow jumped outside the universe where Akasha records exist? Even more impossible. Absolutely impossible. This can only mean something beyond imagination occurred, a brutal mass soul destruction, which implies the number of souls wiped out far exceeds Brunhild's initial estimate. Taking a deep breath, Brunhild brought up a complicated interface and started clicking rapidly, like a hacker. Finally, she hit a button, triggering even more pop-up windows and a massive data dump onto the screen. Her pupils darted back and forth as she processed the information. This character's soul cannot be detected. This character's soul was detected. This character's soul cannot be detected. This character's soul was detected. The more information surfaced, the more horrified Brunhild became. The sheer volume was making her skin crawl. She was filtering data from 259 BC to 202 BC, significant dates. The former was the birth of the first emperor, and the latter was the recorded death of the overlord of Western Chu. Her gut told her the two were connected, so she chose this time period. The results were chilling. She ran a full census of people in that eastern country during that era. A huge number of souls were undetectable, not just soldiers, but ordinary civilians. The periods of mass soul disappearance almost always coincided with the major battles at the end of the Warring States period. Wait, some aren't from the Warring States period, but from the Qin dynasty. One period shows a terrifying spike, with millions of souls suddenly vanishing. That appears to be when the first emperor ordered the construction of the Great Wall. Brunhild's skin crawled. She realized something. The first emperor was also pursuing immortality and godhood, which implied dabbling in dark arts, and those dark arts consumed souls. Had all those people been sacrificed? If he could erase souls on such a massive scale, the first emperor wielded power beyond human comprehension. If that's true, why did the Qin dynasty collapse so suddenly? And why was Xiang Yu the driving force behind overthrowing it? If the two were connected, maybe the collapse of the Qin dynasty was intentional, a cover-up for something, allowing them to lie dormant. She readjusted the historical time node to the period when the Great Wall was being built, planning a visit. Perfect. But then, the anomaly returned. Chapter 38. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After that decision, he should have jumped to the historical point Brunhild wanted. Her vision should have exploded with dazzling brilliance, like seeing a vibrant, mysterious world through soap bubbles. But the moment the jump was confirmed, that brilliance flashed, then vanished as quickly as a popped bubble. Brunhilde felt a slight jolt. It was like flooring the gas pedal, only to have something yank the car back to where it started. So, after the flash, she was still on the bank of the Wujiang River. Had she not left the original point in time at all? No, there was some movement, a slight shift forward. The scene before her should have been the Han King's army in a panic as Xiang Yu suddenly collapsed. But there was no Han army in sight. Instead, she saw the still open portal, soldiers in black armor, and Xiang Yu, the overlord of Western Chu. Had she gone back to a point 10 minutes earlier? Wait. Brynhilder's eyes narrowed. Something was off. First, where was the other Xiang Yu? Why say other? That because there should have been two, the android and the real Xiang Yu. But there was only one figure, and it looked like the android. Where was the real body? She scanned the area. No sign of him, and where was the box? The one that carried the android body. Gone. Could it be the image hadn't gone backward, but fast-forwarded, and then the portal reopened and a new group came through? Yeah, that had to be it. Sis. Randy Grace's voice was incredulous. She was staring wide-eyed in one direction, as if she'd seen something impossible. What was it? Brynhilde followed her gaze and finally noticed a strange, dark shape. It was a ship. But why the shock over a ship? An ordinary ship wouldn't be worth a second look. The problem was, this wasn't just any ship. This was a steamship, the kind that only appeared after the Industrial Revolution, and it wasn't alone. Several transport ships were docked at the riverbank, carrying cargo upstream. Who? That the sound wasn't coming from a ship, but from the land. She looked towards the noise, her jaw dropped. A steam train was chugging across a bridge spanning the river. Sis, it's 202 AD, right? Not the 1700s. Randy Grace sounded dazed. History had gone completely off the rails. The Industrial Revolution, which shouldn't have started for another 18 centuries, was happening now. Had something gone terribly wrong? This kind of historical anomaly couldn't be hidden, but they hadn't heard a whisper of it. It was so bizarre it was making Randy Grace uneasy. Now Randy Grace understood Gray's inexplicable fright the first two times she'd accompanied her sister. Uneasy, she wondered what Gray had seen during those earlier trips. Sis. Randy Grace noticed the panic on Brynhilder's face. Her sister looked lost. Was she even more freaked out than she was? Had she accessed something even more horrifying through the Akashic records? Sis. Her face was pale, as if she'd been blindsided. She was in a daze. What's wrong, sis? I can't connect to the Akasha system. Brynhilder's voice trembled with fear. That was the source of her bewildered expression. When Randy Grace tried to check the timeline, she couldn't summon the Akashic records either. No matter what she did, there was no response. It was like being trapped in a virtual reality game, unable to access the system menu and log out. They were stuck in the game forever. Sis, I think they can see us. Randy Grace had noticed something even stranger. The black-armored soldiers were giving them hard stares, as if they'd spotted assassins. They drew their weapons and rushed toward them, half encircling them, and their weapons weren't swords, but muskets. Of course, muskets were only a threat to ordinary humans. They were Valkyries. They weren't gods, but they were demigods. Human weapons couldn't hurt them. Normally, they wouldn't worry. But everything was so bizarre, especially with Xiang Yu, the overlord of Western Chu in his android form, sensing a threat from them. Stand down. Xiang Yu's order was casual. Yes, sir. The soldiers lowered their muskets without hesitation and retreated in perfect order. So, they had been spotted, but it was only Xiang Yu who had noticed them. Ordinary humans couldn't possibly see them. They were on the other side of the space-time barrier. In this situation, it was as if they had truly entered this era. Entered this era. Brynhilder's face changed. No way, could it really be? Only that could explain it. Was this a joke? They'd inexplicably jumped into this era. Had it suddenly hurtled into the Industrial Revolution? It was as if yesterday was normal BC, and today was suddenly the Industrial Revolution. If it had only jumped 10 years or so, it might have made sense. But Brynhilde saw the hundreds of cavalry following Xiang Yu. They had obviously just escaped from the Han army's pursuit. Most of them were clearly confused by the strange surroundings. She couldn't wrap her head around it, maybe she already suspected it, but didn't want to believe it. As Xiang Yu approached, Brynhilde tensed, fists clenched, ready to defend and counterattack. When Xiang Yu stopped 3 meters away, a flicker of amusement crossed his face. Welcome to the Qin Empire, Valkyrie Brynhilde. Chapter 39. You are listening at novelfull.audio. She had long, glossy black hair adorned with a wing-shaped accessory. Her face was striking and naturally heroic, no makeup needed. She was tall and wore a dress that resembled a knight's armor. She looked like a seasoned battlefield warrior, radiating an intense, almost lethal aura. She resembled a legendary Valkyrie, and she was. Her name was Brunhild. Right now, this Valkyrie was trying to appear calm, but the sweat beading on her face betrayed her nervousness. Her usually sharp, determined eyes now reflected unease. She was visibly tense, almost frightened. Seeing this, Xiang Yu couldn't help but smirk, finding her reaction amusing. This heroic woman was actually scared. Beside her wasn't the easily frightened girl, but another beautiful woman. Her long, brown hair was shiny and soft, her features delicate, and her fair skin glowed. She exuded gentle grace. Welcome to the Qin Empire, Valkyrie Brunhild. These words made Brunhild's pupils contract sharply, intensifying her anxiety. The Qin Empire? Where is this? Brunhild's voice was shaky, tinged with disbelief. Where are you? I think you already suspect where. At his words, her pupils shrank again, her body trembling slightly as she shook her head. She still couldn't believe it. Her reaction unsettled the woman beside her. How do you know who I am? Shaking your head won't change anything. Better to calm down, Brunhild thought, voicing her confusion. Xiang Yu, the conqueror of Western Chu, narrowed his eyes. The Akasha system told me. These words shook Brunhild to her core. The Akasha system told him. Impossible. Or, maybe not. She remembered that when they first used the Akasha system, she'd intended to go straight to 221 BC, the year the first emperor established his dynasty. Instead, she'd inexplicably jumped to the time of Xiang Yu's defeat, witnessing Wujiang's suicide, an event that didn't align with historical records. After that, she tried using the Akasha system again to jump to the time the Great Wall was being built, only to arrive here. It looked like a system malfunction, but Xiang Yu claimed Akasha had told him. That meant the Akasha system had been tampered with. From the end of Solomon's era to their entry, Akasha had been exclusively with the Valkyries. There'd been no opportunity for anyone else to interact with the system. How could this have happened? Wait, maybe someone had entered the system before she and the other Valkyries started choosing humans and changed the settings. When she entered a certain time in a specific country, that setting would trigger, leading to this situation. Yes, that seemed the most likely explanation. With newfound resolve, Brunhild looked directly at Xiang Yu. What's your goal? Now was the time to show courage, to face the situation head-on and uphold the Valkyrie name. My goal? He laughed, the sound so powerful it seemed to vibrate the air, his smile utterly dominant. Then, he fixed them with a piercing gaze, causing them to hold their breath, faces flushed, cold sweat pouring down. You've been given to me as a gift. Brunhild was stunned. Her expression hardened. Given to you? Yes, speaking of which, wasn't there some poppy who was recorded in history as the most beautiful woman in the country? It's a pity that I didn't meet such a person next to me, so I gave you to me as a poppy. Yes, speaking of which, wasn't there a poppy who was recorded in history as the most beautiful woman in the country? It's a pity that I didn't meet such a person next to me, so I gave you to me as a poppy. These joking words made the Valkyrie's expression change color, and she became more and more gloomy. Yes, speaking of which, wasn't there some poppy who was recorded in history as the most beautiful woman in the country? It's a pity that I didn't meet such a person next to me, so I gave you to me as a poppy. The Valkyrie's face darkened, her expression turning grim. So, that's what Baiyu was implying. Of course not. He was just teasing this aloof Valkyrie who seemed to have such a strong, unyielding spirit. But I've changed my mind. Changed your mind? That he wasn't going to make her his concubine after all. His gaze shifted to the side, to Randy Grace. After a moment of shock, Brunhild's face became even more livid. How about I take her and let you go? That it was exactly what she'd feared. Don't even think about it. In that case, you won't be able to go back. What will happen to Twilight of the Gods then? Brunhild gritted her teeth at the interruption. Think about it. See that portal? It's closing. Once it's shut, there's no going back. Looking at the portal, they saw the light curtain shrinking and becoming transparent. Then please let my sister leave, Lord Xiongyu. Randy Grace will stay. Saying this, Randy Grace walked to the edge of the portal, preparing to stay behind. Randy Grace, Brunhild wanted to shout, don't leave her. But she had more important things to do. Could she sacrifice her sister? She hated it, but what choice did she have? Faced with Bayu's piercing gaze, she could only clench her jaw and glare. He looked like a villain. After all, compared to Brunhild, who was he watching as a character in the holographic movie he was watching? How come we can suddenly see her directly and talk to each other? Is it because Brunhild was suddenly pulled into the movie world? It became a real-time travel to his era? The answer is wrong. That's right. The reason why it's wrong is that Brunhild is not in 202 BC, but in the era of 20 years in the Qin calendar. Is there any difference between this? Yes, because in a sense they are two parallel time and space. For Brunhild, the former, 202 BC, is history that has already happened, while the latter, 20 years in the Qin calendar, is history that she has never experienced and does not exist in Akasha. Record the history of this universe. Then, I wish you a safe journey. That with a wave of his hand, a mysterious mark struck Brunhild before she could react, disappearing instantly. At the same time, Randy Grace was also struck by the mark and vanished. He had kicked them out. Behind him, toward Xianyang, the clouds parted, revealing a massive tree that pierced the sky. Chapter 40. You are listening at novelfull.audio. First off, the hibiscus isn't just a pretty flower, it's a big deal in Eastern mythology, practically a classic symbol of creation. Think about this. In ancient texts, it's described as ever-changing, even splitting into multiple forms. Others say it grows in a valley where the sun takes its daily bath, and some even claim it's the tallest thing in the world, reaching all the way to the heavens. So, tying all that together, it seems like this tree is connected to the sun and serves as its dwelling. The sun hangs out in the sky, which, according to ancient beliefs, is where the gods live, a place mortals can't touch. That's why some say the tree holds up the sky, with heaven itself resting on its branches. Basically, find this sacred tree and climb it, and you can get to the land of the gods. Some stories even say it's a doorway connecting heaven, earth, and the underworld, carrying the weight of all three realms. In short, the hibiscus is a world tree that holds up the entire universe. Now, let's talk about Yggdrasil, a name that might not ring a bell for everyone. It's a sacred tree in Norse mythology. The yucca part of the name has a scary vibe to it. Plus, it's another name for Odin, the main god in Norse mythology. The other part, Trasher, refers to a horse, so the whole name translates to Odin's horse. The story goes that Odin once hung himself on this giant tree, stabbed himself with his spear, and discovered the magic of runes. That's why Odin called it horse riding. From then on, the tree became known as Yggdrasil. In Norse mythology, the branches of this giant tree reach into the sky, forming the entire world. They say 9 different realms spring from this tree, spread across 3 layers. You've got Asgard, the kingdom of the gods, Jotunheim, the land of giants, Alfheim, the realm of elves, and so on, all located on this massive tree. Legend has it that 3 thick roots support the tree. One root goes deep into Asgard, where the well of Ord flows. The gods gather there daily to hold meetings and discuss important matters. Plus, the 3 Norn goddesses, the goddesses of destiny, also call this place home. Another route plunges into Jotunheim, the land of giants, where the fountain of Mimir flows, offering wisdom and knowledge. The third route goes deep into Nibelheim, a land of fog, ice, and snow, home to the sick and the dead. Under this route lies the Hvergelmer spring and a river that gnaws at the tree's roots. The infamous poisonous dragon Nidhogg also lives here. It never stops chewing on the roots, and when it finally bites through, Ragnarok will come, and the world will end. So, this tree that supports everything is another example of a world tree. Then, there's the Kabbalah tree of life, also known as the inverted tree, located in the center of the Garden of Eden. In Hebrew, it's called, which translates to tree of Kabbalah, 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 Kabbalah. It's a mystical symbol used in Judaism and a key part of Kabbalah, a traditional Jewish philosophy. Kabbalah uses this tree to map out the path to God, or the way God created the world from nothing. Studying Kabbalah is supposed to reveal the mysterious causal relationships of the universe and help you understand its secrets. They also say the tree of life represents the vast universe, the human body as a mini-universe, and the spiritual journey to reach God. These three concepts are intertwined to form the core of Kabbalah thought. Basically, the Kabbalah tree of life is also heavily tied to creation, which is why it's considered a world tree. Besides these three, you'll find similar sacred trees in almost every mythology, like the cosmic tree in ancient Indian mythology, or the tree of heaven in ancient Egyptian mythology. These could all be called world trees. But even though they get the title, they might not be world trees in the truest sense. You could argue that these sacred trees are all pieces of one true world tree. If they were all separate world trees, these myths wouldn't be crammed into one universe. They'd each have their own independent cosmos. These world trees carrying out creation and forming universes are actually just different dimensions within a single universe. The real world tree exists at the very foundation of everything. So, is this massive tree that seems to burst through the sky behind by you in the direction of Xianyang just a branch of the world tree? Or is it the real deal? It's the real world tree, and he got it as a reward for hitting a certain level of role-playing, but the reward wasn't the world tree itself. He used the rewards to get the world tree. So, what was the reward? It was an item reward, the hibiscus tree that the first emperor found in the Fate world. When he got the hibiscus tree, Baiyu was standing right next to another one. That was the hibiscus tree that belonged to his reincarnated world, the hibiscus in its fairyland. So how did he find the hibiscus tree in the first place? By researching ancient texts, he found a secret entrance to the fairy world, but when he got there, he discovered the fairy world was deserted. After some digging around, he found the hibiscus tree. Later, using the rewarded hibiscus tree, he successfully claimed the one in the fairy world and even accidentally combined them into the seed of the true world tree. It was only after touching the hibiscus tree in the fairy world and reading its Akasha records that he understood why the fairy world was empty. The gods had left this universe. During the Yin and Shang dynasties, the immortals of this world stumbled upon a brand new universe. To keep other mythical gods from finding out, they moved in secret. Of course, that doesn't mean they abandoned humanity. During the Yin and Shang dynasties, a brutal war broke out, and the gods intervened. In reality, the war was a cover for relocating people. They took away the best of humanity. Back to the main point, he used the now empty fairy world as fertilizer to grow the seeds of the world tree. This almost abandoned space was melted down and reforged into a new, smaller world.